webinar. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for No More Excuses, How to Be the Change. We are going to try and debunk the top 10 excuses for not doing D&I, or maybe even not doing D&I well, is a good way to think of it. So I'll do a quick intro of who we are, who Orange Grove is, or what Orange Grove is. So we provide diversity and inclusion services. Typically, that looks like consulting, training, coaching, assessment, a range of options. We can help with your full strategy. We can help with targeted help, but more than anything, we want you to know that we believe in skill sets, in behaviors, and policy as being the agents of change. So that's what we're going to talk a lot about in the how to do, is really how you affect those things to make change and get into D&I on a deeper level. So I am Keely Denenberg. I am a senior client partner with Orange Grove Consulting. And what I do is I help our clients and prospective clients try and figure out what solutions fit them best. And then I help tailor and customize our programs and our services to make sure they have the biggest impact with those clients. So I'm going to turn it over to Jody to introduce herself.
Hey everybody, I'm Jody Detchen. I am managing partner and co-founder of Orange Grove Consulting. I'm also a professor of management at Suffolk University here in downtown Boston. Really love the focus on inclusion, and really, I always think of it as, let's give people freedom so that they can be who they are, and so that organizations can really leverage the talent to its fullest extent. I want to welcome my co-host here today, Stacy Gordon. Stacy, can you introduce yourself? You're on mute. There you go.
I had to take a minute to take myself off mute. Yes. I'm Stacy Gordon, and I'm the Chief DEI Strategist. And I have been working in the diversity, inclusion, and consulting field for a number of years, and provide organizational strategy consulting to my clients really around the globe at this point. And I'm really excited to work with Jody in Orange Grove, and excited to be here to participate in today's webinar.
Thanks, Stacy. And we also have Daphne. Daphne.
Hey everyone, I'm Daphne Chan. I'm the content manager here at Orange Grove, and looking forward to today's webinar.
And she hails to us from Berlin. So we have we've got California, Boston, and Berlin represented, and Texas. So we've got 4 totally different locations. We are really doing the COVID virtual today.
Great. So I'm going to just briefly talk to you about this agenda. What we're going to do is we have highlighted 10 excuses that we have heard through the years. There are certainly many more, but these are the highlights. And we're going to debunk what these, I guess you could think of them as myths, some of them, excuses, myths, same thing. We're going to debunk them with either data, research, or kind of a reasoning that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And then most importantly, we're going to tell you how you can address those things, how you can get past that myth, that excuse, and give you what we think are the next smart steps for D&I work. And hopefully one of you in the Q&A will ask us the unspoken kind of #1 excuse. And so we'll keep our fingers crossed that we get to address that. All right, so next up, I think, Jody, you are gonna kick us off.
Yeah, so I wanna show you some companies here. And all of these companies and plenty more, you've probably in your company as well, have made a statement recently about Black Lives Matter. Some have made statements about gender and equity. Some have invested money in BLM, in the BLM movement. Some have worked to increase representation of women in their companies. But here's the real deal. How many have put real strategic investments in increasing the number of women and people of color in their executive levels? How many have expanded representation across their organizational hierarchy? How many are really invested in making this change as they approach this issue? Not many. So statements are good. They really are important. Appointing a chief diversity officer is good. But to get to the real benefits of inclusion, the ones that everybody talks about, this means you have to focus on the challenge of homogeneity in organizations as a business problem, as a business strategy. You have to tackle it head on. You have to put money on it. You have to think about the impact. You cannot really do this with volunteers. So let's walk through what these top 10 excuses are. And then we can no longer say we don't know what to do, because you know what? We do know what works. It's just a matter of will, and then we can make it happen. So let's start with excuse number one. We've heard this so many times. In fact, I think we hear this in virtually every client that we work with. There's not enough women and there's not enough people of color in this field. The pipeline is empty. So let me just look at technology as an example. So if we look at this in technology, you hear this all over the place. Oh, you know, there's not enough women in technology. Oh, you know, there's not enough people of color available. Well, but how many of you saw Hidden Figures? These were real women. This wasn't a made up story. There were tons of programmers that were women, tons. In fact, we were doing some research for our new book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. In the 1950s, there was a female programmer out of Raytheon, and this is what she said: men can't program, that's women's work. 1950s. So let's just be real. In fact, NASA just named their headquarters after Mary Jackson. So she was one of the women in Hidden Figures because of the power of what she did. So women were there. And you know what? They still are there. So I want to tell you a little story of way back when. So imagine back in the early 90s, I was a programmer. I was a coder. And I'm actually very proud of that. But it wasn't that abnormal for me to be a coder. There was 37% of all coders were women. 37% of all coders were women back in the mid 80s and early 90s. And look at this. So India, around 40%. Malaysia, over 50%. Carnegie Mellon, over 40% of women studying CS are women. Harvey Mudd, over 50% of people studying computer science are women. So people are doing it. There are lots and lots of examples. So think about this. Say that you want to hire more women and people of color. Why don't you go call up Carnegie Mellon and call up Harvey Mudd and say, how did you do it? Then go to your local college that feeds your businesses and say, we want you to do that because we want to hire women and people of color. Within 4 years, you'd have a pipeline. 4 years, it doesn't take much. Maybe even 2 years if you actually worked at it, because they could get some people that are already there. So get this, I spoke to a group of women at Harvard last year, and I told them this. When you think about coding, and remember I was a programmer, coding is actually linguistics and logic. And my son, who's a programmer now, I asked him, I said, is it still linguistics and logic? He's like, yeah, pretty much. Is this in linear algebra? Some of it is, yeah, there's some linear algebra and some coding, but the majority of coding is linguistics and logic. So why don't you go hire some English majors, hire some history majors and put them in a 10-week boot camp. In 10 weeks, you'd have coders. This is not hard. It requires you to put a little more creativity than just putting an ad on Indeed. And this is true in a ton of industries. All you got to do is put up some investment. Stacey, what do you think?
I completely agree. And I think that, I mean, as if I would say anything else.
Yeah, we sort of planned that part.
I think that, you know, this is an issue, and it's the biggest thing we always hear is there aren't enough, you know, fill in the blanks, right? Black women, female coders, whatever it is. I'm stuttering because it's such a simple fix that every time someone says it, I have to stop myself from rolling my eyes because one of the easiest things you can do is you can ask someone. So I tell people all the time, you know me, I'm a Black woman. You could ask me. I could point you in the direction of so many different networks. National Association of Women MBAs is a perfect example of one. It's how I came to know Jody. And there are so many of these ways that it can be done. And so I think the simplicity of it, I think because it's so simple, people are looking for this complex, really difficult thing, and it doesn't have to be like that at all. I think that, you know, when we say like, when we look at recruiters and you can say, listen, we want you to find 30% of, you know, because you just showed an example and said, well, 35% of coders were women. So why not have your pipeline at least be representative of the demographics of the college that's near you, or of what the candidate pipeline looks like? Because, you know, everyone's looking for these large numbers and saying, well, you know, how are we supposed to get it to 50-50? How about you start with, at least, are you even matching what the college output is close to you? Do you even know what that college output is? So I think some of that really has to be done. And what you already said, Jody, in terms of it being able to be done quickly is also true, because we are finally getting to a place where the 4-year college degree isn't necessarily the standard for what you need, right? There are so many coding opportunities for you to get this done quickly. And even if you want a college degree, they can still go through the coding, and then maybe they get their degree while they're working, right? But at least they have the skill set that you actually need. And so it's really about having the skill for this.
I want to jump in really quickly and point out that I hear a lot from clients, well, we only hire from the top universities as an excuse. And, you know, as you see on the slide, widen your list of universities. I mean, you can't just go to those same universities and say, I want your diverse candidates, because you're actually kind of hiring from the same socioeconomic pool of students, even though they may appear diverse. And so if you want the innovation that true diversity brings, you need a diversity of thought in addition to other areas. And that means maybe going to different universities that aren't the same ones you've hired for the last 80 years. Just right.
And I think it's even the idea of this, you know, top, right? Like, what makes it top? And is it top for your industry, for you specifically, for this role, for this job description? What are the key performance indicators? What are the key competencies that are needed for this particular role? And do you really need somebody from Harvard to do this role? 99 times out of 100, the answer is no. But yet we're using this metric, this it's not even a metric, it's a made up idea, and we'll talk more about fit in a little bit. But, you know, we're looking at these ideals that somebody came up with, and we have held on to, and we continue to use again and again and again, even when they no longer serve us. So I think that we really have to stop relying on these ideals. We have to stop saying that this is how we've always done things. We have to stop saying, well, this is the schools that we've always gone to, and we have to get creative. You know, I jokingly say this all the time. Like, if you've ever heard me say, you know, be on a presentation or do a webinar, you've heard me say that I tell recruiters that recruiting is an active job. It's an activity. It's an action. And so if you were sitting behind your desk, even in times of COVID, waiting for people to just drop into your ATS system, you are not a recruiter. You are a waiter.
I love it.
If you want to be a recruiter goes out and recruits. You go out and search. You go out and find. You go out and locate. You go out and identify the people that are going to fit those key competencies for the job that you need. And that requires you partnering with the hiring manager to make sure that they have adequately identified what those key competencies are, which again means your job description isn't just a carbon copy of the old one you've been using for 10 years, but that it is updated and accurately reflects what the job is today, so that you can do your job as a recruiter and go find the candidate that matches that skill set.
So let's think about the second excuse. So once upon a time, we promoted a person of color or a woman, but you know what? They really, it didn't work very well. You know, they didn't really quite make it. This is called tokenism. We hired one, they didn't work. This is called fit, quote unquote. Yeah, they didn't quite fit. This is the yeah, but.
And I want to jump in and say, let's say you were to switch out woman, person of color with whoever is your in group. In this case would be a white man. And you say, well, you know, we promoted a white man once to achieve our numbers and they weren't ready, so they failed. We won't try that again. you realize how silly it sounds when you replace whatever it is you're describing with the in-group. So just a quick note before we get into this one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes flipping it, that narrative is actually really, really cool. So whenever you come up with a label, flip it with a power group and see what happens. So let's think about why it is that people that you have put into a role didn't succeed. So did they succeed because there wasn't enough support? Did they succeed because of bullying? Did they succeed because of isolation? You know, I just spoke to a woman yesterday. She was a young woman, and she loves trees, and she went into forestry, but she was the only woman, and she couldn't take it anymore. She's young. She's like in her mid-20s, but she left the industry already because she felt like she was the only one. Think about that for a minute. This isn't because she didn't want to go into it. It's because she felt isolated and she didn't have the support. So who fails in this situation? Is it them or is it us? Who is the one that's responsible? And maybe it's both. But they weren't ready means that it's their fault. And so is it really that? What we've seen in our work and in other research that we've seen as well is that in-groups often get this ramp, and it's a hidden ramp, and out-groups don't. And so, for example, who gets exposure to senior leadership? Who gets exposure to the clients? Who gets the arm around the shoulder? Who gets the, let me tell you how it is? Who gets the constructive feedback? And again, it's hidden, and it's most likely to be the in-group. These things aren't measured, they're not tracked, they're informal. And so it's not that this is bad, it's just human nature, but it's been hidden. And so what we're trying to do is shine a light for you on it so that you can see some of all the different hidden ways that people don't get that leg up. So leaders help people succeed or fail. And the other thing is the superstition that one outgroup member represents all members of that outgroup, and that puts an untenable burden on that person to be the role model. And it's not fair, nor is it accurate. So what do? So first off, you got to give people support. If people become successful, if we support them, they're going to be less likely to fail. And we can't just support the people that are like us or the people that we like. We have to support everybody that we think has the raw capability to get into that role. We also need to formalize our processes. Because so much of this leg up, this ramp, is informal, we need to formalize it as much as we possibly can so that we can at least see it and measure it. We have to remove this gut feel, this feeling like, I think that's the way it is because, you know, that's the way it always is. We have to structure feedback so that everybody gets feedback, because constructive feedback is it's a little painful. It's hard to give to people. Nobody enjoys it. So if we structure it and we formalize it, it's going to be more likely that we actually give it to everybody, not just the people that we feel more comfortable giving it to. We also need to avoid those hiring tests that are starting to become ubiquitous. They are biased, folks. They rarely measure the capability of somebody accurately. And oftentimes they're not even research-based, like a Myers-Briggs, not even research-based. So be very careful about using hiring tests to tell you who should be good and who's not. That 30% that Stacy mentioned, you need to hire 30% because when you hire one person or two people, they become the woman on the team, the Chinese person on the team. Instead, 30%, they're now the part of the team. They're no longer the role model for that particular group, that particular category. They're now just part of the team. You also want to offer opportunities, all these informal opportunities for development that I mentioned. Very simple ways to get people exposure and to give people the little leg up that aggregate to the big leg up.
And while you're examining all of this, I would suggest that everyone also look at your criteria for defining a high potential employee, because those opportunities are given to high potential employees. Maybe you need to kind of go step back even further to look at that criteria.
Excuse number 3, Stacy.
Yeah, so we never told the bidders that this was a criterion for the project, so it wouldn't be fair to use it. This is such an interesting one because, you know, if you've ever had, you know, put out a request for proposal, you know that there are requirements and there are things that you will outline. And what we sometimes hear is, well, we never said up front that we should, you know, include diversity as a criterion, so it wouldn't be fair to include it now as we're halfway through the process. And I think that, first of all, it probably doesn't even need to be stated that diversity is a criterion for the proposal, because it should just happen, right? So the fact that we haven't put it in writing, it's really not necessary. Like if you look at me, every time I look at a proposal, I'm always looking for diversity. That's just what I'm going to do, regardless of what the guidelines say, because I know that that is the right thing to do. I know that we need to have a diverse slate regardless. So I think that we have to look at, you know, saying it's not in the bid, right, is like a compliance issue. Whereas we have to look at what is the moral issue. Where are we actually, like, what are our values and what are we looking for as an organization? And, you know, there is an example of a friend of mine who was participating in some bidding for a community pool. And I think it was more like it was a community, you know, they put it like almost like a YMCA, but it was not a YMCA. I don't want to have a YMCA think it was them. But they were part of this process, and they were having this exact conversation, right? They were saying, look, we've started to receive these bids. We haven't had this criterion. And she had to sit there and say, listen, we need to be thinking about these things. And so as the bids are coming in, they're looking at the websites, right, of the companies, and they're looking at who they are, what their makeup is. And you can start to see really who it is that you're going to potentially be working with. You can see that some of the bids, you know, that they're getting, these companies, they are all one particular race or ethnicity, or even, you know, gender, like there's no women. And I think that what started to happen is, in this process, you start to see that not only do you see it on the website, but you see it in the attitude. It's reflected in how people speak to one another. So one of the other excuses that you'll get is, oh, that's just the website. That's just the photos. We just haven't gotten around to updating. Really? Is that really true? You know, I remember looking at CHROs, right? Usually your chief human resource officer within an organization is female. If you go through, I did this one time just as a random exercise. I went through a bunch of different company websites to look and see if their CHRO was listed as an officer on the organization's website. And 8 times out of 10, they were not listed. Or if they were at the very bottom with no photo.
Wow. That's interesting.
So you cannot say that that's just the website. No, that is reflective of your attitude, right? It is reflective of your work style. It is reflective of what our working relationship will look like. And we're not going to have it, right?
Yep.
It's not going to continue. So what do? I think you have to realize that you are the customer and that you have a lot of power. You can have diverse supplier teams. You can request it. You know, if you are the person that is seeking out services, you can demand that you want to see diversity in that team. And then on the flip side, you don't want to have organizations putting people up. You know, Jody said tokenism earlier, right? You don't want to take the one Black person and make sure that they're in every single, you know, meeting with the client, because it is, not only is it just wrong, it's dishonest, you know, and that person who is being, you know, for lack of a better word, trotted out to meet these requirements, that person is going to leave. That person is probably already looking for another job. They're just doing until their other job has been found, right? So you have to like push beyond that first look. Like, is diversity just a figurehead? You see that one person in the meeting, great. Ask them, will you be participating in future meetings? Will you be on the conference calls? Will you be an active participant in this conversation moving forward? Do you have an active stake in this project, right? And if you can't get those answers, or if there's some hemming and hawing, or even if they pause, just the pause tells you they're like, ooh, I'm going to have to answer this question in a way that doesn't make me lose my job, but the answer is probably no. How can I hedge, right? Like, it's really important to hear how they answer that question. And, you know, you want to mirror this. You also want to not just in the way that you're asking for it from the company, then you need to also do it. internally, right? Like so many times we are asking for so much more of our vendors than we are giving of ourselves. And so if you're asking your vendor to be diverse, you need to look inwards and look in the mirror and say, what have we done to make sure that we are diverse as well? Because that's really important. And then you need to reflect your customer communities. And I talked a little bit about that previously in terms of looking at what the demographics look like. You know, if you have, you know, I'll use Coca-Cola as an example, you know, Coca-Cola bottling plant in the middle of a predominantly Black neighborhood, a lot of those employees better be people from that community, right? And be reflective of the demographics, right? So I think it's important to look at that. And if you don't know the demographics of the communities that you serve, you should.
Stacey, I just want to go back really quickly and highlight something that you said. Having a diverse supplier policy is not a diversity and inclusion strategy for your organization as a whole. And I see that a lot from companies where they're like, oh, we have a diverse supplier program. Okay, great. What about your own diversity internally? So it's great that that exists, but it does not mean you have a strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of in line with the mirroring, right? Like,
yes, 100%. It's that. I'm just calling it out really explicitly.
Yep. So excuse number 4, our customers aren't comfortable working with women or people of color. And so we let our customers choose who works on their accounts. And of course, we can't risk arguing because we may lose our client. This is such a great excuse because this is really the opposite, right? This is when we're the supplier, we're the one that's the consultant, we're the ones that are supposedly have less power. But we're not exactly sure that that's the case. People are always afraid of customers. They're afraid their customers are going to leave. They're afraid that they might take advantage of us. But is it really true? So if you think about it, in actuality, our customers have invested a lot of time in finding us. They've invested time in building that relationship. They've invested time in connecting and all the work that we've done together. They're not going to drop that at the dime just because you say that you want to show up with a little bit more diversity. Now, if you're not owning up to your side of the bargain, that's a whole nother issue. But in terms of just saying we can't show up with diversity because our customers don't want it, it's disingenuous. Actually, what you can do instead is be the role model. The first thing you can do is show up diversely. If you bring a diverse team, your customer gets used to a diverse team. And it ceases to even be something that they recognize. They'll get more comfortable. They'll actually see that your diverse team is strong. And what you're doing is you are role modeling what it could be like. And you are becoming the informal teacher. The second thing you have to do is amplify. So this means that you have to share the incredible strengths of your diverse team. Whether you are a diverse leader or not, you can show how great your team is. Not by saying, oh, the woman on our team is great. No, by saying, Linda on our team is great, is what you want to do. We work with a lot of service organizations, and we've heard this story in a myriad of ways where they have a diverse team, and for example, a diverse gender team, and the client will go straight to the male on the team and assume that he is the project manager. So what you do is you train your team members and you say, okay, if that happens, then what you need to say is, Jacinda is the project manager. That's all that person needs to say. Now the client has learned Jacinda is the project manager. And now they'll forevermore go to Jacinda as a project management. You don't have to sit there and call them out. You just simply redirect them to the right answer and they will learn. The last thing you have to do is you have to think about living your values. If D&I is a value, you have to show it. You have to role model it. You have to mirror it. You wouldn't do something unethical if they asked you. So why would you assume that the client is going to have poor intentions? Often it's simply a lack of awareness. If they flat out said, you know what, we aren't working with a Black person or we aren't working with a woman, why on earth are you even working with them as a customer? It has to align with your values. And if you have a strong enough relationship with that client, then you can also give more honest feedback. And you can say, you know, we felt a little bit of discrimination from some of your team members. But if you're going to do that, you have to do it very delicately. And I highly recommend you do it level so that the two levels are equal. But this is a last resort. There are so many other things that you can do so that you can role model what diversity and inclusion looks like on your team. Excuse number 5.
Yes. So I think as we look at, this is very similar to what Jody just said, but it's looking at the person who is, bringing in a lot of money for the firm, right? And as I know we can't see you, but raise your hand, right? If you have somebody like this on your team. It's like the person brings in a lot of money for the firm, and so you just kind of ignore him, and you go, "Oh, that's just John. Oh, well, that's how Sally behaves. Don't mind her. That's just, right? Like we do this. We excuse all the time. And why do we do this? We excuse them because they're making a lot of money for the firm. But are they really? Because at the end of the day, they might be making a lot of money, but once we finally have to deal with them, how much are you having to pay, right, to deal with the aftermath of the situations that they have caused within the organization? And you really shouldn't even have to do that cost benefit analysis. At some point, if this is happening and you have accountability in your organization, you have to just say, we don't tolerate, period, goodbye, you're gone, right? So leaders with bad behavior affect the entire organization. Not only do they affect, but they infect, right? They are insidious. And when you find that common workplace responses by those who experience sex-based harassment are to avoid the harasser. Well, of course, I don't want to be harassed. I'm going to, avoid this person as much as possible. And in fact, I was on another webinar with somebody who said she was in the production industry and had an incident where she was like a designer, a clothing designer though. So she would have to come in and fit the actors and actresses and make sure everything worked and whatever, right? So she was part of a wardrobe. And she was in a room with somebody who would constantly harass her. And when she went to HR, the person said, well, just try to avoid being in a locked room with him.
Wow.
How was she supposed to do that? It's like, okay, I will try to avoid being in a locked trailer with my harasser. Thank you. But you're actually told to avoid it, right? And then, of course, you have people who deny or downplay the gravity of the situation. I don't know where that falls because what just happened, I'm not sure where that falls on that list. I haven't heard, but.
Wow.
So 54 to 73% of people do deny or downplay the gravity, and 44 to 70% will attempt to forget it, and they endure the behavior. So that's kind of where she is, right? She's enduring this, and it sucks. So what we find, though, is that we look at this, and I say we, I mean the organizations, and we'll say, well, it's just the one bad actor, right? It's this one bad apple, and it's just him, so we'll just fire him, right? But it's not just him, it's the system. It's the system that allows that person to thrive unchecked. And that's what we actually have to deal with. So when you think about a rainmaker who might be, making a lot of money for the organization, we also have to look at, are they a person that is doing damage? And maybe maybe somebody is not a rainmaker, but they're collaborative, and they are mentoring others, and they are helping them to become rainmakers, right? And they are so you're not going to see that individual as the money maker, the one that's really padding to your bottom line immediately. But what this person could be doing is really helping to sow the seeds and building sustainability within your organization. And which of those two is more important to you in the long run? So I think it's really important to think about that, because when you say that you are afraid of losing this bad actor and you're afraid of losing money, it reinforces dangerous conformity, it reinforces groupthink, and it also prevents others who might want to speak up from doing so, because they realize that this is not an environment where I'm going to be heard or I'm going to be listened to.
So excuse number 6. Hey, we don't have any open positions in leadership. Nobody's going anywhere. What are we supposed to do? No need to do anything. So this is the fixed pie thinking of how to do diversity and inclusion. We don't have any openings, so what are we supposed to do? But let me ask this question. Is this how you run your business? Oh, we can't find any customers, so what are we supposed to do? No, You don't run your business that way. So why would you run inclusion this way? Be conscious. Look at your organization top to bottom. What we see, because we look at a lot of different organizations, is you look up and the top looks pretty homogenous. Pretty much looks like this probably, because this is what most organizations look like. Where are all the women? Where are all the people of color? They are at the bottom. So instead, think outside the box. Think creatively. You know, think about how to have more. Maybe just make more leaders at the top. Think about rotating leadership. You could share leadership. You could show visible power. So if you give people that are outside the homogenous group more power, make it so that it's real power, not just something that looks like power, because everybody knows what's power and what's not power. Restructure. Use the opportunity to restructure to change the way power is distributed, because it's always about power, by the way. It's always about who has decision-making and financial power. Grow your pipeline. Invest in all the different ways that we talk about, all the invisible ways. And then you want to role model leadership, because what ends up happening with role model is people look up, and if they can't see somebody that looks like them, they think, the opportunity's not there for me. I can't do it. So instead, if you don't role model diversity at your senior leadership level, diversity will die. It's just the definition of it, because as long as it's homogenous, that's how people are going to look. So you need to get creative in how to get your senior team diverse. You need to think about what's it going to look like that we can get more power to more diverse group of people so that we can showcase that it's possible.
Work hard, play hard culture. Love this one, right? Women often don't fit into our culture, and we have the type of culture that you know, individuals. If you've ever looked at an ad, and I think words, we've been working on job descriptions, right, and changing them a little bit so that you're not seeing as much things like beer on tap as a perk, and so. But one of the things that used to come up a lot is people will say, well, we need to be able to blow off steam. This is what, you know, this is just what we do. This is just how we work. But, you know, when you think about culture fit, it's often an excuse to discriminate. It's an easy way to do it without actually saying that you're discriminating, right? You have an idea in your head of who you want for a role, and you hire to that specification, right? So in your head, if I say surgeon, and you immediately picture man, because we all do, right? Unless your mother is a doctor, or you have a female, you know, surgeon in your immediate network. When I say surgeon, the first thing you think of is man. It's just how that works, right? And so when you think of whatever the job is that you're filling, right? You have a persona in your mind of what this person will look like, and you hire to that. That is what fit is. And so it is a way for people to, it's a cop-out, it's a way to uncritically reject people, right? Without saying, I didn't hire you because you're not a man, right? We're not gonna say that. We just say, well, you didn't fit. What you mean is you didn't fit the mold of what I had in my head. And so next time that you say fit, I want you to think that. I want you to think, nope, I'm saying that this person did not fit the mold that I had in my head. And that is discriminatory. So I'm hoping that anyone who's listening to this will never again use this, because you'll never be able to use the word fit again without thinking, I'm discriminating. And you are. So fit is not measurable. It's not duplicatable, it's not replicatable, and it's not structured, right? Fit is, I like them. They went to the same school as me. They've just got that something, right? Because again, it's this mold that you have, this thought process that you have, and this place that you are trying to get to. And so what we really want to be doing is you want to get to capability. You want to be looking at the skill. You know, earlier I said key competencies, right, for the role. Can this person do the job, right? What are the key competencies that are needed? What are the values, and how do they align? And do they align to our organizational values, right? And if I don't know what the organizational values are, I shouldn't be recruiting right now. I need to go figure out what those are. And so, does it align also to the work environment? Right now, our work environment's a little bit different. We get that. Things have changed. But we've got to start asking questions. We've got to start asking, what do you mean, right? What are you trying, if I say culture fit, what do you mean by that? What is it that you're trying to get at? What is the thing that you think that you need within this job? And what makes you think this person doesn't have it, right? What metric are you using to measure this? And so again, fit, as I said, it's not measurable. How do you measure fit? Right? It's why you need to do structured interviews. It's why we have to have a process that is duplicatable, and that is able to be used by everyone so that we have standards, consistent standards that everyone is able to apply across the board. So I think that if we value diversity, that is a big piece that really has to come into the equation.
Yep. So number 8, our competitors aren't very diverse, so our problem doesn't stand out. I love this one. This is one of my favorite ones because let's be real. Would you ever say this about your own products and services? I'm betting not. Everybody remembers Blockbuster. So think about this from a strategic perspective. When you think about inclusion, what you can see is that we're actually past the enthusiasts and we're really into the visionary stage. We're actually more into the pragmatists. We've already passed the early stage of the diffusion curve. So there's a lot of industry leaders out there that are really doing diversity quite well. You've got GE, Bank of America, Nike, Accenture. They've taken diversity to a whole nother level. They're measuring it. They're achieving these goals. They're not perfect, but they're way out in front. So your competitors might not be diverse yet, but if you don't start moving up the curve, you're going to be left in the dust, just like your competitors. And in almost every industry on the planet, the level of change, you think COVID, you think Black Lives Matter, you think technology, change is happening so fast, and change is going to take, this change of inclusion takes about 3 years if you do it right. It's a cultural change, it's a structural change, it's a process change. It takes time. And so if you don't start now, you're going to be behind the curve. And let's be real, millennials and Gen Z, they're enthusiasts. They're already enthusiasts. So if you don't start making these changes, you're not going to get their talent because they don't want to work for you. They don't want to work for a homogenous organization. They want to work for a diverse organization. So the ones that are in the visionary pragmatist stage, they're the ones that are going to get the competitive advantage in terms of customers and in terms of talent. So you can wait to start, but personally, I would get the competitive advantage and start now.
The women have babies. Yes. You know, like, and in other news, water is wet. What?
You know what I like to say? I like to say, you're welcome, because if we didn't have babies, there would be no customers to, buy products and no one to pay for retirees' Social Security and Medicare. And so you're welcome.
Well, the corollary to that is that men have babies too. Women don't have these babies all by themselves. So why is it that when a woman has a baby in the workplace that we focus on the women? What about the men? The men have babies too. So it's another one of those. So when you hear someone says, well, she's going to have a baby. Yes, so is her husband or her partner or whatever. So we're tired of this one. We really are, because pregnant women and mothers are assumed to be less committed to their careers. And that's so insulting. It's just so insulting to women who have careers. We don't get up and go to work every day because we just feel like it, right? We have goals, we have ambition as well. And so women lose out on about 4% of lifetime earnings per child. Per child. I have 3, by the way, so I just want you to do the math on that. Right? Not, So I think that when we start looking at women who maybe, if they're working fewer hours or taking, family-friendly kinds of jobs, we've got to start thinking about even the time off that we give people. We call it parental leave, right? And we've started changing that language. We've got paternity leave, right? And even just leave. How about we take that off? Because if I'm not a parent, maybe I just need leave, right? Or maybe I have elder care, which we'll get to. But at some point, we need to just stop defining the type of leave and just give people leave. So I think also as we look at, COVID right now, we're saying, look, this has been I hate to say that this has been good for work, but it has been sort of good for the workplace, for employers to really rethink so many of these hardline perspectives that they have had about remote work, about leaves, about flexibility, about hours, you know, that you must work between 9 and 5 or 9 and 6 actually, at least out here in California. East Coasters, I miss the 9 to 5 work week, but or work day. So I think that there's that, you know, like being able to say, hey, I can get up in the morning and I can work from 7 to 9 and I can get a lot done. And then I need time off between 9 and 11 and then I can get back on, right? Like, how are we rethinking the way that we do this? The same for single parents. How are we, taking care of individuals? I put single parents and people with, elder care responsibilities sort of in the same bucket, because they have these responsibilities that are sort of a little bit above and beyond. And how do you rethink doing this in a way that is not going to make others feel as though, well, they're getting special treatment, right? It's really kind of silly, I think, at this stage. So I think that we have to look at all of the different stages of life and understand that we are all people, we're all human, and we all have different needs and within our workplace. And it's not up to the workplace necessarily to have to cater to everybody, but it is up to the workplace to be equitable for everybody. And you can do that by giving everyone a type of benefit that they can choose to use in the way that makes the most sense for them and individualistic.
Which leads us to the last excuse. Really following on what Stacey's saying, it's a meritocracy. And here's the thing, if women and people of color aren't in leadership, it's because they chose different paths, like motherhood. So, it's not because we are a meritocracy. We put the best at the top. But let's play this out. So if we assume that meritocracy exists, then that means there would already be greater diversity and equity at the top of the organization. But there's not. So therefore, what it really says is that if we have a meritocracy, women and people of color must not be as capable. That's the only conclusion you can come to if it truly is a meritocracy. But if you take the other side and you say, well, meritocracy actually doesn't exist, then that's why we don't have diversity at the top of the organization, which tells us that we want to work towards meritocracy, but we're not there yet, and we need to examine the reasons why. The first one tells us we don't have to do anything. Let's just kick back. It's just the way it is. The second one says this is a problem and we can solve it. The second one gives us action. So what do? What you do is you reframe the conversation and focus on the facts. If you truly want a meritocracy, then you need to commit to changing the broken system. You need to remove the embedded systemic bias. And how do you do that? You examine it. You look at this like any other operational problem. You look at all these different factors. What are your gender inclusion numbers? Do you have pay equity? How aware are people of the different biases? How do you hire? How do you hold people from leaving? How do you evaluate performance? What does promotion and pipeline development look like? Mentoring and sponsorship. What are you role modeling? What's your culture like? What's work-life synergy? And then how is your external impact? Once you figure out what's going on, and this is the work that we do, and we work with companies around inclusion, you figure out where you are, where are your strengths, where are your challenges, and you fix the areas that aren't working, which leads us to how you get out of it. So at Orange Grove, what we do is we have a 3-step process. First, you have to change the mindsets of employees. You have to help people examine and literally reframe bias, because you cannot create a new system with an old way of thinking. So you must change mindsets as the first step in the process. Then you need to give people the skills. Everybody assumes that everybody should have the skills of inclusion, but when has anybody been taught it? You're not taught it anywhere. And so therefore we need to figure out, what are those skills? Do people know how to facilitate a conversation so that everybody's voice is heard? Do you know how to have a difficult conversation around race and gender? What are the specific skills? We actually outline them in our new book, which is coming out in September. so that you can see what are the skills that you can train for. And then you need to change the environment, the processes, figure out where it's embedded. Like, for example, we talked a lot about hiring, and fix that. So then if we think about it, our book, The Next Smart Steps, it's coming out in September, really has 5-step process. The first thing you need to do is you need to define and envision what is inclusion at your organization. What's it look like? What's it like to have a meeting? What's it look like to have lunch? How does it feel? So you need to envision it with all the parameters. And then you need to understand the current state, like the previous slide that I showed you, where you're actually looking at all those 12 indicators and figuring out, where are we? Where are our strengths and where are our challenges? Then you figure out what we need to change. Maybe you need to change hiring. Maybe you need to change promotion. Maybe you need to change rewards. And you figure out a process step. And then you pilot it. And if this sounds exactly like an operational change, it is. And the last step is you roll it out. You measure, you systematize, you review. And so just like you make any other operational change, you make this change. The beautiful thing about it is that you already know how to make operational change because you've been doing it a lot in your organization. All you need to do is apply the same thinking to inclusion. That is the solution.
Excellent. Thank you, Jody. We're going to get to some questions in a minute. I just wanted to point out that, we went over a lot of excuses and a lot of things that you can do. If you want to review any of them and have a discussion to kind of think through and brainstorm, I am available for that. That's what I do. And it may be something huge that you need help with, or it may be one little part of, kind of a strategy you're going to put together, and we're here for all of that. So please reach out. We can just brainstorm. Maybe you can get ideas of maybe for future things to do or things to do right now that, you can integrate immediately. So I'm going to ask Daphne to queue up some questions that were in the Q&A and see if we can address any of those.
Great. So our first question is, what if the CEO or some of the C-suite is racist? Is that something that HR can approach? And if so, how?
I'll start, and Stacey, I'd love for you to chime in as well. I think the thing about this is that I think racist is a very loaded word, racist, sexist, whenever the is. And then if you label anybody like that, then you will immediately end all change, because people will do whatever it takes to defend their identity. And I think what we have to do is we have to think about, how can change be made? So in an organization, let's just say that the CEO is highly resistant. One of the ways that we often suggest that you make a change like this is to find people within the organization who are supportive of it and pilot some change there. Measure the heck out of it. Show the benefits, and then gradually roll it out. So let your change, your pilot, start to prove the story, and then gradually move there. Because what ends up happening is that a lot of times people get, they're not sure, it feels very risky. And so if you're in an organization that's sort of at that back end of the curve that the innovation curve that I showed you earlier, then what you need to do is you need to slowly introduce the idea so that it starts to become normalized. Stacey, you want to add anything?
I'll just say that, as you said, Jody, when you start to name call, right, you are backing somebody into a corner. And the other question is, are they racist, right? What makes you say that they're actually racist? And I'll give a quick story on this. I think it's actually Kelly, we were talking about this, who had a client who was, they said exactly that. They said, this person is racist. They did some coaching and found out that actually she was classist, right? She was just a snob. So the question is, how do you know, what that person is saying or what they're doing may come off one way when they're actually meaning something else? So first, before we start labeling people, we first need to identify really what's going on underneath that. And then we need to go do some coaching. We need to have some conversations around letting them know how their behavior is affecting others. Most people do not intend to walk around making other people feel bad. And so when you let them know, when you do this, it makes other people feel this. They usually will hear that. And it's just in how you do it. So I think, you see there that the coaching is a big piece.
Our next question is, this all sounds great, but how do I get a budget?
So this was the question I was wondering if it would be asked. It's kind of the number 11 or number 1, or just overarching all of those things. How do you do this? How do you get budget? So I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. One of the ways is to plan for it, right? Get a proposal, figure out what you want to do, what it will cost, and then put it into your next budget. There's always budget cycles. And if you plan for things, you're a lot more likely to have that money set aside. Maybe partner with learning and development. Partner with talent acquisition. Maybe they have training budget that could help in a significant way, or even in a little bit. They have something for training that you can use to do some strategic training. The other thing I would suggest is find a leader who believes in this and partner with them. Figure out what kind of budgets they have access to, who they can talk to, who might have extra budget left for this year, this fiscal year, or the next year. That's what I would suggest. Where there's a will, there's a way. And we absolutely know that when something is important to leadership, all of a sudden there's budget for it. So that's my advice. Good question. I was waiting for that one.
Can I just add to that too? And I think that the key too is that when something is strategic, to your point, Keely, there's always budget. When something is looked at as a nice to have or a checkbox, then that's when people sit there and go, oh, well, we don't have enough money for that. But when it becomes a strategic initiative, oh, we need to make sure that we're competitive in the market. Now, all of a sudden, you will find the money that you need. And what you'll also get is you'll get the direction and passion and support from the executive leadership team. And that's how you inculcate change across the organization.
Well said.
So that will conclude our Q&A. We've gone a little bit past time. Just to let you know, a recording will be sent out after this webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.